Welcome back, Sebastian here. In today's video, I'm going to take a look at which Formula One team has improved the most so far in 2023 from the start of 2022. So luckily for us, the opening two rounds of the season for both the 2022 F1 season and the 2023 F1 season are the same. So first Bahrain, then Saudi Arabia. So let's get started. So first looking at Bahrain, comparing 2022 to 2023, looking just at qualifying, the 10 most improved teams are as follows. So first was Aston Martin with an improvement of 2.441 seconds. So clearly, as we know, probably the biggest improvement. They were the slowest team at Bahrain 2022, and they were probably third fastest in qualifying this year. Second are Williams, 1.203 seconds faster. Third are Red Bull with 0.973 seconds faster. Fourth were Mercedes, 0.708 seconds faster. Fifth, Alpine, 0.706 seconds faster. Sixth, Haas, 6.6.5 tenths faster. Seventh, McLaren, 0.627 seconds faster. Eighth, Ferrari, 5.58 seconds faster, and AlphaTauri 0.235 seconds faster, and Alfa Romeo had the smallest improvement from 2022 with 0.11 seconds faster. So that's for Bahrain. Track layout was identical. So you can see here that the Aston Martin gap, the improvement from Aston Martin was twice as big as the next biggest improver. So that really shows how much development they were able to do. And we know from just how poor that A-spec car was last year. And from about Miami, Baku, Monaco onwards, the car was much closer to the McLarens and the Alpines in race pace. In qualifying, it was still about the same as the Alfa Romeo and the Haas. And conversely, the Alfa Romeo was probably the third or fourth best car in qualifying at the start of 2022 because they were one of the lightest cars on the grid. But with 2023, most of the cars being pretty close to the same weight, that advantage has obviously fallen away, and they haven't made that much progress. AlphaTauri are probably the biggest surprise for me. They've only improved by 2 tenths, and last year they weren't even that good at the start of the year. They were kind of in the mid-pack, a bit ahead of Williams and Aston Martin, but definitely well behind the AlphaTauris, for example, or the Alfa Romeos at Bahrain last year. So smallest improvement, so not great for AlphaTauri. So next we'll move on to Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia first, Aston Martin, 1.526 seconds faster. Williams again second, 0.498 seconds faster. McLaren third, 4.08 seconds faster. Mercedes 0.247 seconds faster. Haas 0.095 seconds faster. Alpine 6, 0.01, so 1/100th of a second faster. Actually slower, yes, for Alpine. And then Red Bull 6.5/100ths slower. Ferrari 0.195 seconds slower. Alfa Romeo 0.278 slower, and AlphaTauri again off the back with 0.685. So you'll notice right away that the improvement times from Saudi Arabia compared to Bahrain are much smaller, and this is almost entirely because of a very small change that they made to the circuit. I believe at turn 22, you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but they effectively made one of the chicanes tighter, and according to some of the teams, this accounted for almost about 7 tenths of a second, which is why you see the times being remarkably slower. So for example, for the Red Bull, even though there's 0.065 slower, if you add that 7 tenths, it'd be about 7.5 tenths faster compared to last year around the rest of the lap. So that kind of explains the pace deficit here. Very similar at the top two, very similar at the bottom two, and then in the middle there's a bit of a mix-up, but not a lot. So let's go lastly to the overall. So this is basically the average from the two, from Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, to see who was overall had just has a bigger sample size who's had the best improvement over the opening 2 races. So first, no surprise, Aston Martin, 1.984 seconds faster. Williams, 0.851 seconds faster. McLaren, 0.518 seconds faster. Mercedes, 0.478 seconds faster. Red Bull, 0.454 seconds faster. Haas, 0.374 seconds faster. Alpine, 0.348 seconds faster. Ferrari, 0.182 seconds faster. Alfa Romeo, 0.081 seconds slower. And AlphaTauri, 0.225 seconds slower. So I think overall you can see that most of the teams have made pretty substantial improvements, and that's with Saudi Arabia being much slower than being quite a bit slower than last year. So I think obviously the data shows that Aston Martin obviously made a massive jump basically from the start of 2022 basically being the 10th or 9th fastest team to basically 2nd, 3rd, 4th fastest in qualifying, somewhere around there. Williams made a really good step up from basically being 10th to being 8th, 7th in qualifying now, so that's great to see. McLaren is the really surprising one. So despite everyone saying that the start of their season has been so dreadful, I think it really puts into perspective how bad they were at the start of last season in qualifying. Of course, this year they've had really bad luck in Saudi Arabia with both cars getting damaged on the opening lap, and Bahrain, where reliability was extremely poor. So the actual pace of the car I don't think is that slow. I think it's not terrible. Of course, last year they had massive improvements through the 3rd, 4th, 5th race of the season. Lando Norris got the only midfield podium of the season last year in Imola, of course, at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. But you can see just from the data that McLaren's made a pretty sizable step up in qualifying. Mercedes 4th, not a surprise. Last year, the start of last year was absolutely horrid. 5th, Red Bull. So this is probably one of the more interesting ones. So people have been talking to start of the year about how dominant Red Bull is and how they're going to win every race of the season. I think in qualifying, I think honestly they've improved, but they haven't improved a lot. And the gap between them and Ferrari in qualifying is actually pretty small. Or more specifically, the gap between Red Bull and Charles Leclerc is pretty small. And I think really their domination has come through their race pace, their tire management, and that's kind of the big differential between themselves and the rest of the grid. In qualifying, they're basically about average. Haas, I think they'd honestly be pretty happy with that. They were very good start of last year. I think qualifying, they're still quite good. Still midfield, lower. They've probably dropped a little in the overall order. Maybe now middle of the midfield, lower midfield. I think race pace probably is a bit worse than last year though. Alpine, Alpine haven't improved a lot. They're still 5th fastest, so they actually dropped a spot probably from the start of last year. But I think they're definitely closer to the Ferrari, but their gap to, say, Mercedes has dropped, and they've obviously dropped tons of time to Aston Martin. Ferrari, not much to say. They've really, I think, been really, the start of last year, their car was exceptional in qualifying and in the race, and they've really dropped the ball over the winter with developing this year's car. The technical directive, TD39, and then I think really hurt them the second half of last year, and it really hurt them developing this year's car. And they still don't have the floor working the way that it was at the start, or as efficiently as it was at the start of last season. Alfa Romeo, not much improvement. Obviously last year they were fantastic out of the box and then tailed off. And I think that kind of tailing off, being midfield, lower midfield, is kind of where they are right now. And they haven't really improved at all. And they're really getting caught by all the other teams kind of developing, and they've really plateaued. AlphaTauri, slower overall. So for AlphaTauri, I think they've probably the most frightening for them, this result, because they don't really have any. Last year they weren't particularly good, so they don't really have the excuse of having started really quick out of the box with the new regulations, and then kind of maybe being outdeveloped. They were pretty bad last year, and they're even somehow even worse this year. Really shows that, and the Honda engine is not the problem. In the Red Bull, it's fantastic. So it's really on the aerodynamic chassis side for AlphaTauri that is the problem. So it'll be interesting to see how the development continues into the spring, and as usual, first upgrades come around Spain. This year teams are talking about it being Baku, but it'll be interesting to see how the cars develop. And of course, everyone will be excited to see how they perform at this upcoming weekend's Australian Grand Prix. So thank you so much for watching. Who do you think improved the most this year? Who do you think will continue to improve through the season? And please like the video if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe if you want to see more Formula One and Formula E content. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.